like to welcome everybody to today's session regarding quality risk management, in particular applied to clinical trials and pharmacovigilance. And I'm looking forward to today. Essentially, I am going to go through the course in such a way that it's very much designed to be a hands-on experience. What I wanted to do with some of these photos was basically to give you an idea of risk in the real world, so to speak, and see how it also applies just as well. And given this photo here of this sign, you know, when you read that, it can be interpreted a number of ways, but one of the ways that I certainly interpret it here is simply to say, when it comes to risk management or risk identification, in some situations, it may be appropriate to simply accept that risk and nonetheless continue with your original objective as such. Here being the case that if you're coming to this location, not clear if it's the flying club in lower left or whether it's some sort of other type of driving, but you've accepted those levels of risk, and in this case they decided not to mitigate significantly, so there's no trauma unit hanging around in a close-by hospital, but nonetheless that's been accepted and you move on. And similarly, in some other photo, you know, indicating that risk is also a question of perspective. It always is important to really consider, you know, whose perspective is relevant for your risk assessments and deal with that accordingly. So in another picture here, I have a picture of a sign which is indicating, you know, that there's animals here in the zoo, and please be sure not to fall off the fence because it may upset the animals if they eat you. And there, again, another indication of risk, but here the concerns are about the animals, not about those people that are climbing up on the fence. And so when we go and you go about analyzing potential risk exposure at work in your daily processes, it's important to keep those things in mind when you go about that as well. So for today's course, as far as learning objectives, here I'm listing those things that will be covered as such. And so first and foremost, we'll be up front giving you a clear definition of what quality risk management is all about. Beyond that, as I mentioned, it's about applying those principles. And so I will be showing you very concretely how you build quality into a given process so that you can, in fact, assure yourself that a certain level of quality is coming out of that process along the way. So what are some of those key points that you can do in a clinical development process? Beyond that, we're going to be looking at some of the basic principles of quality risk management, which, for example, how do you identify risk? And as such, how do you go about calculating a given risk result? So this is very much about risk management from a quantitative perspective. It's not a qualitative approach here that has elements to that, but ultimately it will be data-driven. It will be about making some calculations in order to determine what kind of risk exposure you are dealing with at the time. Beyond that, it's showing how you implement this approach and what sort of influences are there with regards to compliance and with regards to your overall quality objectives. And related to this, of course, is that because it's data-driven, we're going to show how you leverage that information which is available to you in your working environment, depending on what you're focusing on. And then finally, we'll focus on essentially governance. So what makes this possible? What kind of organization needs to be in place? What kind of supportive processes are relevant here? And then we'll cover some of that as well.